All right, today we are tackling a big one, a powerful and, let's be honest, often misunderstood philosophy that has literally fueled revolutions and shaped entire nations: dialectical materialism. Let's get right into it. So, to really get this, we have to start with a huge question, one that people have been wrestling with forever. How does history actually happen? I mean, is it just one thing after another, kind of chaotic? A straight line of progress? Or is there something else, like a hidden engine, driving it all?
Now, for Karl Marx, this wasn't some abstract thought experiment. He was convinced history could be understood like a science. And think about it. If you could figure out its laws, you wouldn't just be a spectator watching from the sidelines. No, you could actually become an architect of the future. The point wasn't just to talk about the world, it was to change it.
Okay, so here's our game plan for unpacking all this. First, we'll get a handle on the core theory of change. Then we're going to look at what they call the three laws of motion that supposedly drive it. After that, we'll see how this theory jumped off the page and sparked actual revolutions, look at a really sharp critique from our source, and then finish up with a new path forward that's being proposed. All right, let's dive into the core idea. And honestly, the name itself, dialectical materialism, is the perfect place to start, because it's got the two key pieces of the puzzle right there in it. So it breaks down into two main parts. Think of dialectics as the method, right? It's the lens you use to see the world, not as a collection of static things, but as this dynamic web where everything is connected, constantly changing, and full of clashing forces. And materialism? Well, that's what the lens is pointed at. The physical, real world, the material conditions that are there whether we're thinking about them or not. And you have to understand, this was a huge break from the way philosophers have been thinking for ages. This other tradition, called idealism, basically said that ideas come first, that our thoughts and our consciousness are what shape reality. Materialism just flips that whole script. It says, no way, our ideas don't just pop out of thin air, they grow out of our material lives. The tools we have, how our economy is set up, the very ground beneath our feet. Okay, so if the material world is always moving and changing, what's making it move? What's the engine driving it all? Well, Marx and his collaborator Engels were convinced they'd found the answer in three fundamental laws of motion. Together, they laid out these three core laws of dialectics. These were the rules they thought governed all change, not just in society, but in nature, in science, and everything. Let's walk through each one. The first law is all about how a bunch of small, gradual changes can suddenly lead to a massive transformation. The classic example, and it's a great one, is heating a pot of water. You keep adding heat, right? That's a quantitative change. The temperature goes up 1 degree, 2 degrees, 10 degrees, but it's still just hot water. But then you hit that magic number, 100 degrees Celsius, and bam, a sudden dramatic change. It's not water anymore. It's transformed into a completely different thing: steam. That's a qualitative leap. And the idea is that society works the same way. Small changes build up and up and up until they hit a tipping point and trigger a revolution. Law number 2 is really the powerhouse, the engine of all this. It says that everything in the world contains opposing forces that are locked together in a struggle. So in capitalism, you have the owners, the bourgeoisie, and the workers, the proletariat. They absolutely need each other to exist, but their basic interests are in total conflict. And it's that constant tug of war, that tension, that's what drives change. And the last law describes the shape of all this progress. It's not a straight line forward, it's more like a spiral, always moving upward. A new stage of society, say capitalism, negates or overcomes the old one, like feudalism. But, and this is the really key part, it doesn't just wipe it out. It actually absorbs the good stuff, like new technologies or trade networks, and builds on them to create something new and more advanced. It's a cycle of transformation and renewal. So that's the theory. But what happens when these ideas stop being just words on a page and get put into practice by some of the most determined revolutionaries of the 20th century? Well, that's when things get explosive. Yeah, this was not a theory destined to just sit on a dusty bookshelf. Leaders like Vladimir Lenin in Russia and Mao Zedong in China saw it as a practical, hands-on blueprint for action. It was a guide for movements that would go on to totally reshape the world we live in. Now, what's really fascinating, and what our source material points out, is how figures like Lenin zoomed in on one part of the theory more than any other: the struggle. For him, that clash of opposites wasn't just part of the story, it was the whole story.
It was the absolute, all-consuming force driving history forward. And then you have Mao Zedong, who took that idea and cranked it up to 11. He famously said that a revolution is not a dinner party. For him, it was a necessary, often violent act of pure will. The focus completely shifted from patiently analyzing history to actively grabbing it by the collar and forcing it to change. Okay, so this intense focus on struggle, on sudden, violent breaks, this brings us to the central question from our source material. By putting all the emphasis on revolution, do these interpretations maybe miss a huge part of the picture?
So the source we're examining puts these two models side by side. On one hand, you have the revolutionary model, all about abrupt ruptures driven by class conflict. But on the other hand, you have a more evolutionary model, inspired by Darwin, that's all about gradual adaptation, continuity, and the long, slow process of survival. So which is it?
Well, the argument presented here is that maybe the main driver isn't class struggle at all. Maybe it's something even more fundamental: technology. I mean, think about it. From the very first stone tools all the way to the microchip in your pocket, it's technological innovation that has truly revolutionized how we live, work, and organize our societies.
So where does that leave us? We've got revolution on one side, evolution on the other. Do you have to pick one? Well, the analysis we're looking at proposes a new way forward, a synthesis that tries to combine the power of both.
It's called adaptive dialectical praxis. Yeah, I know, it's a mouthful. But the core idea is actually pretty simple. It's about finding the sweet spot, a way to balance the slow, steady rhythm of evolution with the need for those big, decisive, revolutionary leaps when the time is right. It's not about choosing one or the other, but knowing how to use both.
And the really important thing here is that this isn't just more abstract theory. It's meant to be a practical, hands-on framework. It's all about starting with real-world problems, letting small changes grow and mature, and building in democratic safeguards to make sure that any progress we make is real, that it lasts, and that it actually serves human well-being. You know, all of this leaves us with some pretty big questions to chew on, doesn't it? Like, what's the actual goal of all this progress? And how do we build a society that doesn't just change, but can also protect the good things we've achieved so they aren't lost?
And really, when you boil it all down, it asks every one of us to think about the best way forward. Do we build a better future one slow, careful step at a time? Or does real change require a sudden, great leap? As this analysis suggests, maybe, just maybe, the real answer is you need a little bit of both.